The first time I picked up a brush sober, I was totally confused. That's the truth. I was a little bit terrified. It was something different, and I didn't quite know what to do about it. Today I want to talk a little bit about how we start being creative again after we get into recovery and what those first experiences can be like. I'm going to talk a little bit about fear. I'm going to talk about what I discovered from being in recovery about this process, and learning how to navigate painting and being creative again. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the shift, in my own thinking when it came to making art in recovery. So yeah, when I first came into recovery, I had so much going on in my own head that what my art became was a welcome break from all the massive changes that were happening outside of my creativity. And so, I found my relationship got better, I had loads more money, I was sleeping well, work was going good, all these great gifts started to rush in as soon as I stopped drinking and using drugs. And what I used my creativity for at first was kind of like a counterweight to keep me grounded at that time, because it's true what they say, like in early recovery, sometimes the gifts that we receive can push us back out there just as much as any bad news that we might receive. And so extreme feelings of positivity are something that need to be managed and dealt with appropriately at the time. So when I was early recovery, I used to draw and paint a lot, and the first time I did it, it just felt so strange, because for such a long time, any time I'd been creative, I was either high, I was drunk, I was hungover, I was off my face, I was at a party or something like that, and I hadn't really had any kind of consistent studio practice for a long time. I'd had a lot of journal entries and little diary bits and bobs and sketchbooking, that I used to keep with me and take on my travels. And they definitely served the purpose, but one of the biggest challenges when I first came into recovery was like that first time I painted sober, I realised that it wasn't going to be easy, and that was really hard for me to accept. I realised that I didn't have anywhere to turn other than what was facing me directly, whether that, it was a canvas in my case, but it might be a guitar or whatever in yours. I used to use drink to run away from things. I used to use drugs to run away from things. And so when I was trying to be creative in active addiction, I used to use those things to sort of medicate myself and to run away from the reality of the situation. So when I was living in chaos, creativity to me might have been like being so completely wasted. I'd have a canvas on the floor and I'd just be like throwing paint at it, trying to make it look like a face or something, using palette knives to just scrape loads of paint and whatever, a total disregard for any kind of intention or technique or any kind of like serious consideration about what I was doing. But I thought that was making art, and even you could argue it's some kind of art therapy, but there's no intention there, there's no bigger meaning or feeling behind the work. And like when I came into recovery, I didn't have those moments anymore, because I wasn't changing my mind with these substances every day. I was just left with myself. And so to start painting, and figuring those things out with a sober head was, it was a real challenge at first. And what I started to notice slowly in that process of making in sobriety, in recovery, was that there was more of an honesty there, not only to my work, but to myself, because, necessarily, when I used to change my mind all the time with drink and with drugs, I wasn't being honest to myself, because I wasn't able to sit with myself. I wasn't able to be with myself, and just experience life and the world. I had to change it with substances that came from outside of me, And recovery, really started to teach me some things about creative integrity, about creative honesty, about also about hard work and determination, you know, and actually following through on things that I said I was going to do. Because in active addiction, I would just abandon pieces of art left, right and centre, you know. If I had a tiny little thing go wrong in the day, I would just bin it off, you know, and smash it up or cut the canvas up or whatever, screw it up, throw it in the bin, start again because it was going wrong, you know. And in recovery, I've had to learn to fight through that pain, to take a step back, to breathe, to process, to reassess a situation, and then to dig back into it, you know, and find a solution. So that is a massive shift, thinking about what I used to be like in active addiction to what I am now. And hopefully you can experience the same thing, or if you have experienced the same thing, or something slightly different, I'd love to know about it. Because I think, like, for such a long time, and I know this is my case, I felt like I needed drugs and alcohol to be creative. So when I first had to step up, you know, and be creative without them in my system, it was like a really weird thing for me. It was totally alien and strange. And the funny thing is, right, you know, now looking back, 5.5 years down the line, I don't think that I ever really achieved much creatively in my active addiction. There were a few things here and there, but in terms of visual art, you know, I don't really think I made many good paintings at all. And for example, when I went to study, I lived abroad in Krakow, and I used to drink all the time there, you know, every day, in Poland. And I was studying at the art academy there, the Fine Art Academy, and I believe it was the best in the country at the time. Very traditional, and I just couldn't get my shit together for long enough to make a decent painting, you know. And I really wasted that year. I could have invested so much of my energy into that process of learning how to draw and paint, but I was so wrapped up in the partying, in the socialising, in the drinking and using drugs and nightlife, that whenever it came the time to sit down and sit with myself and an easel and a canvas and some paints, you know, I was unable to figure out how to make a piece of art. I didn't know where to start. I definitely didn't know how to finish, you know. And everything I made there was just so surface level. It was all a bit ironic. It was all a bit like, I don't know, some kind of joke about being an artist or the art world. And I didn't take my work seriously, whereas now I do, you know. I feel really deeply about my art. It's a spiritual practice. And so the first time I painted sober was the first step on that spiritual journey. And as an addict, I really feel strongly that every time I start doing something, I should be able to master it straight away. You know, this is one of the downsides of being in active addiction, or being someone who struggles with substance abuse or whatever it might be. I want to perfect things straight away. And so painting in recovery has taught me that I need to just take things slowly, you know, and do things slowly. And, you know, I've really been digging into oil painting as a craft over the last several years. Yeah, and I've come on leaps and bounds, but it hasn't happened overnight. And so that first step is the most important, isn't it? I really don't think that sobriety kills creativity. So if you are worried that it's going to kill your creativity, I would say don't worry about that. Or perhaps do worry about it and express it in your own art, you know. Just make sure you don't stop being creative. If you're worried about how your creativity is going to be impacted by getting into recovery, then do an art project about that. Write a song about it, write a piece of poetry about it. We've got this wealth of information within us that we can tap into at any time, you know. We are incredibly deep and complicated, unique individuals. We've all got our own stories to tell. And so that would be my recommendation, you know. If you are worried a little bit that it's going to kill your creativity, just lean into your own experience, lean into how you feel, lean into your own recovery journey or your own active addiction journey, and you'll find that it deepens it with time. So that's about it, I think. I've come to the end of my little notes, as per usual. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I am really enjoying making these, you know, it helps me to formulate ideas, it helps me to think through my own recovery as well. It helps me to think about my own creative practice here in my studio. And so yeah, give it a like, give it a comment, give it a subscribe if you feel so inclined to do so. And yeah, check out Creating Sobriety, which will be linked in the description below. This is my new community for creative people who struggle with mental health, who struggle with addiction, who are in recovery or curious about what being a creative person in recovery looks like. It's for you, definitely. So check it out. Thanks.